It is Friday, and we are working for Crusoe. Friday, January 24th, 2025. In Los Angeles, he is Sam Park. In Reno, Nevada, I am John Ramey. And on this episode, the United States of America has a new presidential administration and a new president. And Donald J. Trump is no shrinking violet. He has dominated the news cycle already. He has not even completed a full week of being the president for the second time. And so we've got a lot to talk about, how the Trump administration is impacting our areas of focus here on Working for Crusoe. That, of course, being foreign affairs and economics. Trump spoke to the Davos World Economic Forum. There have been a series of executive orders, some of which bump into things we talk about. But Sam, I think we need to talk, first of all, similar to how we did at the start of the Gaza war, we need to have kind of a meta conversation. We did not have this podcast during the first Trump administration. I was working.
Yes.
Yeah, I was working in news only peripherally. I was the guest booking producer on the Jim Bohannon show, which was a nationally syndicated news talk program on Westwood One. And for booking a chat show, Donald Trump is great. He does daily any number of things sufficiently outrageous to stimulate sufficiently interesting conversation on whatever media platform, radio, television, internet. And so that's good because our media landscape is so filled with people just having opinions and talking about the news, because that's a cheaper thing to make than actually covering the news. You have to hire reporters and editors and do research. And so that's a by the by. But that was my only previous kind of journalistic interface with the Trump phenomenon. But now, as we go into this first week, it's a fire hose of what would have been considered individually quite newsworthy, if not outright outrageous or illegal actions. But because he has so perfectly figured out a way to keep the traditional news reporting press at 11 on their 0 to 10 scale, that he essentially has canceled out the news media's ability to draw attention to what he's doing, right? It's just this din. And his supporters can just tune it out, and people who don't care that much about politics can just kind of tune it out. Am I reading that right?
I think you are, but there's certain advantages that we have here at Working for Crusoe over all other programming. And one of those advantages that
besides you and me?
That's right, that we have only two areas of discussion, which are, as you say, economics and foreign policy. So there's many things that Trump has done already and will do in the future that aren't actually going to figure into our discussion. So we have a built-in filter, and that helps, I think. The other thing I would say, though, is that Trump is such a ridiculous figure in many ways that it's easy to be dismissive of him. But it's important to remember that he's only just become the president again, and he will be for another 4 years. So regardless of whatever we might think of him, anything that happens over the next 4 years will, in some sense, be attributable to him. Mm-hmm. And so we're going to have to talk about those things in as much as they arise. But for example, John, you mentioned yesterday Trump's address to the World Economic Forum, that is the WEF, not the WTF, at Davos, Switzerland, right? Sure. In which he spoke mercifully for only about 15 minutes, which I was surprised, actually, that I thought he'd begin for an hour.
Did you get through it?
Oh, sure. But what he said didn't actually amount to any real policy prescriptions thus far.
No, he just talked about how he won all 7 swing states.
Yes,
It
to
was
the World
ridiculous.
Economic
Yeah.
Forum. That's right.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, we know, thanks. So we don't actually have to touch on any of those things in great detail. We might perhaps want to comment on one or two of them. But until he actually goes forward with a policy decision in any way, I think it would be just to make it easier on ourselves, not to mention our dear listeners, right? It would be advisable that we just focus on what he's actually
Yeah.
doing.
Yeah.
And in that case, I would say that today we should focus on immigration above
Sure.
all else, because that is the area in which he's actually making some headway in terms of his own policy uh, parameters and priorities.
There are a couple of executive orders that deal specifically with immigration. But even before we start on that, Sam, I do also want to think about how on Working for Crusoe, there will be stories that are not about Donald Trump. Other nations will have elections and they'll pass laws.
Oh,
There
yes.
will be, governments will rise and fall. Wars will start or end. Like this won't, no matter how much maybe the Trump experiment wishes to hijack all public discourse, this will not always be what on earth has Donald Trump done this week in economics and foreign affairs. I
Yes,
mean, I suppose it will be sometimes.
There's a very large rebel offensive happening in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo right now, actually, which is
Had no idea.
which is not
Yeah.
an insignificant development. And so we're going to have to make sure that we're not letting Donald Trump crowd out every other thing that's happening in the world, which are numerous. But the problem with that, though, is that the United States is such a consequential country that things that might seem unrelated to the United States actually will be. And we'll have to make sure that we point those out too. It'll be a challenge going forward.
And just one more thing on kind of this meta-analysis about how to report on, cover, discuss the second Trump administration. Kind of back to my initial point, how his methodology keeps traditional media and well-intentioned journalism at kind of a fevered pitch nonstop so that it's easier to just kind of tune it out, right? Because everything's a 10 out of 10 or enough things are a million point font headline story that you can just, auditory exclusion would be kind of like how that happens in the real world. Like an alarm going off for 10 minutes, you don't hear it as much after a while. I do think, and this is you're very good about this. I am going to pledge to attempt to bring a little bit of some of the judiciousness I try to bring in a sporting event that I'm broadcasting, which is to say, if something really important happens and it's really consequential, as a play-by-play broadcaster, I actually don't have to get too excited. And the challenge is sometimes to make sure you're not so excited you're bigger than the thing you're covering, because the moment will speak for itself. And I do genuinely believe that a sober enumeration on our part over these next 4 years will actually do the job just fine.
Great. How about we start right now?
Okay, good. Sorry. Okay. So the U.S. RAP, the Refugee Admissions Program, suspended. You sent me a good piece from the PBS NewsHour that we will link in the show notes, we promise. This program is the gentleman from the Afghanistan evacuation program who was speaking on the NewsHour said this is the gold standard in vetting for people who come to this country.
Yes. I should say the Afghan evac is an NGO. They're not an official government entity.
Right. Sorry. Nonpartisan, certainly. But those folks that are being brought to the United States are being vetted at the highest level. Yeah. And so these folks are not dangerous. These folks are not contributing to any kind of border emergency or invasion or anything of that nature. And the New York Times reported for decades, the U.S. refugee resettlement program reflected America's ambition to be a world leader in human rights. Whether a Republican or a Democrat was in the White House, support for refugees was strong. This came from the Cold War, right?
Yes. And I'm honestly, uh, I think this is very illustrative of exactly what's going on in the Trump administration with regards to immigration right now. Now, mind you, the pace of deportations has ramped up considerably, but it's nothing like the mass deportations that we were led to expect. But the Trump administration is, I would say, making a great deal of headway on its policy priorities in regards to immigration simply by making bureaucratic adjustments. The refugee program is one of those aspects. Another one is the asylum procedure, which has essentially been shut down.
Yes,
Uh,
no new asylum seekers now on the southern border. They're just
that's right. And,
not
or, I mean,
accepting.
they're not being allowed in. Now, this
Yeah.
is illegal, I
Yeah.
want to point
Yes.
out, right? I mean, asylum is part of American law.
Right.
I think the refugee program is something that the administration has some discretion over.
Sure.
But the asylum program is enshrined in American law, and ending it would have to require an act of Congress. Now, they might be sort of uh, uh, couching this in terms of sort of a suspension while we investigate, the perhaps some sort of proposed irregularities that are going on in the asylum procedure. But I have to think that in a way they're just trying to stop people from coming here, and they are succeeding.
Hmm.
Is the point I'm making. So it doesn't matter if you're a refugee or human rights or any of these things, right? The whole point is just to have fewer people coming here. Now, I want to make this very clear. My own personal opinion is that we should have more immigration. Uh, now, so when I say that the Trump administration is being successful in pursuing its priorities, I don't mean to say that I approve of that. I'm just saying that in terms of the political priorities that he laid out during the campaign, he is succeeding in
Yeah,
meeting some of the promises he's made.
he's delivering. So
Yes,
just to make this clear, there is one executive order suspending the refugee U.S. RAP, Refugee Admission Program. There is another executive order that declares a border emergency, right? And if I may read from this executive order, America's sovereignty is under attack. Our southern border is overrun by cartels, criminal gangs, known terrorists, human traffickers, smugglers, unvetted military-age males from foreign adversaries, and illicit narcotics that harm Americans, including America. That's an interesting phrase. This assault on the American people and the integrity of America's sovereign borders represents a grave threat to our nation. Sam, you and I both live in Los Angeles. That's not what I observe. Just just want to point that out. Another executive order related to this is requiring people who are already attempting to, or who are already seeking asylum, they've got to wait in Mexico while an immigration judge considers their cases. So there are a couple different orders that are impacting this larger southern border situation. But by declaring the emergency, he also then can activate like the military and funnel funding without congressional approval for various security measures like building a wall.
correct. And I think that, for example, during the first Trump administration, there was quite a great deal of public outcry when children were being put in cages and separated from their families, some of whom, by the way, have not been reunited even now.
Right.
Uh, and I think that they might be trying to be just a little bit careful in how they do this now, right? They want to just keep people on the other side of the border instead of having them processed here. The raids that we've heard about thus far, and the deportations we've heard about thus far, are again not outrageously large in number, and they seem to be very spread out. And so now, mind you, one of the executive orders gave them the power to go into schools, churches, or not the power, mind you, but authorized the practice of going into places like schools and churches, which was just something that immigration enforcement decided not to do previously. Now, as far as we know, they haven't gone into a school or a church. It's just that they've sort of designated these places as places that they would not shirk from going into.
Sure.
And so I think a lot of it is just to create a climate of fear and deterrence.
Shock
right?
and awe, frankly.
Sure. And to stop people from even attempting to come here and to scare people who are here already. Right. And as far as stopping people from trying to come here, it does seem like they are succeeding. And I think that's something that we're going to have to keep an eye on going forward. And I'm not certain that anything can be done to stop this, right? I can't imagine what could happen in the future that would suddenly cause these numbers to ramp back up. And so while we're talking about this, I want to again point out that the reason that I support larger numbers of immigrants coming here is not just because I'm that sort of person, right? It's because, among other things, immigrants in America and in other Western countries tend to have more children than the native-born population. And this helps sustain the working age population in our country. And
yes, liberal economic laws are good for the economy.
That's right. And stave
immigration
off
laws.
the demographic decline that's happening in many different parts of the world, especially the Western world, but also in other places like China, Russia, South Korea, Japan. And as societies age, you end up with fewer working age people and a larger number of retired people who then start to drain away the whatever pension and or healthcare programs that are designed for them. And so if you put more immigrants into this country, you can at least sort of fend off that outcome. And so there are possible long-term economic ramifications of these policies that no one's even talking about, let alone thinking and wondering how they might play out. And I just want to make sure that we put that on the table here, because this is one of many ways in which immigration policy is economic policy. And again, we're just 4 days in. We're going to have to see how this all plays out.
Also reading from the Border Emergency Declaration executive order. Because of the gravity and emergency of this present danger and imminent threat, it is necessary for the armed forces to take all appropriate action to assist the Department of Homeland Security in obtaining full operational control of the southern border. Now, Sam, I have crossed the southern border into Mexico in a car and on a motorcycle several times, although none recently, none since Trump was president, even the first time. I am proposing this summer we might want to take a field trip. I think it might just be interesting, or at least a research trip if we don't do the actual episode there. I would like to see what that looks like, crossing from California into Baja.
Okay, you might not be able to, is one thing I would say. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't do it, right? But
we might not be able to cross into Mexico and get back in as American citizens.
You might not be able to see the
Sure.
from the border crossing. It might not be visible to you what the military involvement looks like.
Sure.
Right.
But again, just my basic kind of, gut level journalism is, well, we should probably see that.
Okay. Part of what the military is doing is building additional barriers, not so much a wall as like installing more floating buoys, for example.
Sure. Right.
Or that's a redundancy.
Bollards or whatever.
Yeah. but they're also, and this is new, right? It's military aircraft that are
Mhm.
deporting people as of right now. And that, as far as I know, is unprecedented. Now, there's been plenty of air deportations via aircraft before. It's just that none of them have been in military aircraft. So I don't want to sound alarmist like, oh, this has never happened before, right? You know, it doesn't really matter what kind of plane you're on when you're getting deported, frankly. You might not
Sure.
even know. Uh, but uh, so what I'm saying is it's not like there's, you know, an army of guys down there with guns pointed across the border. Okay. And uh, now, mind you, I'm opposed to in further military involvement in border
Sure.
enforcement, but I want to make sure that we're not sort of, you know, running around with our hair on fire talking
Sure.
about this. This is a question of degree. It could ramp up. There could be as many as I believe that they've sent an additional 1,500 troops down there so far. They're talking about a possibility of up to 10,000. And I guess they might try to expand that at some point. But that's, you know, an unprecedented number of troops, but it's not a lot of troops,
Well, not when
actually.
you consider how long the southern border is with
Exactly,
Mexico.
right? And so, you know, again, you know, this is certainly concerning, but it's not something that is it's not an actual emergency, I guess is what I'm
Right.
trying to say, right?
Right.
Despite what the executive order says. Uh, and so many of these orders are just meaningless, right? For example, in
I
our
tried
other,
to eliminate the ones that were just for show and talk about the ones that actually took action.
yes, I mean, and let's face it, sending the military to the border, that is an action, right? That is a
Sure.
real thing that's happening. But there was another one about bringing down inflation that was
Yeah,
just
it was nothing.
completely inconsequential, right?
Or
And
looking
so,
into tariffs.
yeah, exactly. And, you know, all this sort of thing. And so, and I think that's part of the point, actually, is just to come out with dozens of these orders that, uh, you know, many of which aren't going to be meaningful at all. And so uh, people have to sift through all of them and try to figure out which ones actually make a difference. And it's difficult to do. And that's, again, just part of the challenge that we're going to face over the next 4 years. And it'll be difficult for all of us, I think.
Just again, back to my kind of meta journalistic analysis of this, the Trump phenomenon in that setting off all the alarms all at once constantly, and then just allowing the public at large to grow used to it so they can ignore it, is so uniquely suited to our media landscape now. It just
Yes.
wouldn't have worked this well in the 70s or the 80s, right? It
Well,
just
it wouldn't the mechanisms weren't there for it, right? I
no,
mean, it's possible to actually be plugged into the news all the time, 24 hours a
sure,
day, if you want to be. And so they're taking advantage of that. And I think
yeah.
to a certain extent, it just helps to take a couple of steps back from this and try to get a bigger picture view. But again, that's not an easy thing to do. It's just,
No.
I think it's just an important thing.
There were a couple other executive orders that were not specific to immigration. Do you want to move to those? Do you have any more thoughts about the initial kind of moves on immigration policy?
No, because we're going to have to see how these things play out. I
Yeah.
guess there's the one about birthright citizenship, which
Yes.
that's
I left that out because you can't just cancel the 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution
no,
via
but
executive order.
actually, Priscilla Alvarez on CNN.com wrote a pretty good piece about this, in which she basically pointed out that the whole point is to just move the ball, right? It's not like, in other words, the executive order is going to be eventually end up in front of the Supreme Court, right? We already had it quashed by a federal judge yesterday who said that was, quote, blatantly unconstitutional, end quote. It's like, wow, nothing gets by this guy, right?
Yeah.
But the point is that I think they are going to hope that obviously they will hope that the Supreme Court will just say, "Oh yeah, that's totally constitutional," but I don't think that's likely. But
I
they
mean, it
hope
could
that
happen, but I agree it's unlikely.
yeah, that they hope that the court might allow a sort of carve out a category of people that from whom birthright citizenship can be stripped, and just again move the ball down the field a few yards
Sure.
for future action. It's sort of like they did with abortion rights, right? They just gradually chipped away at them through the
Sure.
courts until they got to the point where they could overturn them. And that's not, I mean, so far it's without much consequence, but it's something that we should be aware of. That's the only reason I wanted to mention it.
A similar thing happened with the definition of the Second Amendment as we come to know it as well.
Exactly. Yes. This is a longstanding conservative legal strategy, right? Is just constantly keep chipping away at constitutional strictures.
All right. But again, this is not a constitutional legal podcast.
No.
So we'll get back to the stuff on foreign affairs. With the withdrawal of the United States from the Paris Climate Agreement. That was expected. I mean, it is what it is, I suppose. There's not much to contribute. I don't have much more to say about it. We're out. And then a national emergency declared regarding energy. The first U.S. national energy emergency declaration, according to the New York Times, which could unlock new powers to suspend certain environmental rules or expedite permitting of certain mining projects. There's no energy crisis. We were producing more petroleum than ever. We're the number one oil producing nation on earth. There is no energy crisis.
That's right. And I think that in many ways, so many of these executive orders, mind you, they have economic and sort of international implications. But in almost every case, they also have aspects of them that are much more about the culture wars, right? The immigration stuff, again, it has real policy implications, but it's also part of a battlefield in the culture wars, right? Energy is the same, right? We're already producing tons of energy. There's no problem, right? It's just a question of sort of giving the finger to the environmental lobby, right? And saying we're not going to listen to you anymore. It might not end up having any consequence whatsoever. It's just a political and cultural posture that they're trying to adopt. Birthright citizenship is the same way, right? It doesn't matter whether they actually end up doing it, right? It's just a way of saying this is who we want, who we are. This is how we want to be seen as people. And in some ways, that's the worst part of it, right? For me, anyway.
Because it's so cynical?
Yes. And rude, right? And just uncaring. It's like you say, like the refugee program, this is about human rights. And
it exists to show that we were the good guys and the Soviet bloc were the bad guys.
Yeah, and then so basically, if you're ending the refugee program, you're kind of just saying, yeah, we don't care.
Yeah, we're okay if you think we're the bad guys.
That's right. And you know, with the energy stuff, it's like, yeah, we don't care if the world burns, right? We don't believe that there is a climate crisis, right? Which is a kind of a weird thing to say when Trump is right now in Southern California looking at the scenes of the catastrophic wildfires that we just had. And so much of this is just political, as was his address to the World Economic Forum yesterday. It's just a posture that he's trying to adopt. Maybe some of those things will come to pass, right? It's certainly possible, right? And that's another sort of larger point that I'd like to make here, that we're in for 4 years of this, right? We know that Trump didn't actually end the war in Ukraine in the first 24 hours of his presidency. And we know none of us ever thought that he would. But that war has already been happening for almost 3 years. And I really have difficulty imagining that it's going to go on for another 4 years, regardless of how it ends. And so when it ends, it will happen under Trump's administration, and its results will be attributable to him. Whether it's a good result or a bad result, we don't know. But I think it's probably going to take a while, but it's going to occur under his presidency. And so he will get credit for it if credit is deserved, or blame if blame is deserved. Probably some of both, I would think. But it'll almost certainly be down to him on some level.
Yeah, I got nothing more. I feel like we need to pace ourselves.
No,
You
I
know,
agree
it's
with you. But just one more thing about the war in Ukraine. He
sure.
really does seem sort of annoyed about this, right? And in that nobody's actually talking to him about it, right?
Right.
He was said to have had a conversation with Xi Jinping before he was sworn in, right? And he said that went well. And uh, but they've sort of been going back and forth with Russia this week, where Russia says, sure, we'd like to talk and engage in mutually respectful dialogue. But we haven't seen any signals, which is not true, right? Trump has said over and over again that he wants to uh, reach some sort of negotiation. And so maybe that will happen. I'm sure it will at some point, right?
He
But
actually posted on social media that he wanted to make a deal in quotes, which
that's
I
right.
thought was hilarious,
That's right.
as opposed to making a real deal.
And he threatened Russia with tariffs,
Tariffs.
right?
Yeah,
Taxes, which he can't actually institute against Russia,
that's right.
and
Threaten them with taxes.
additional sanctions, right?
Yeah.
Now, mind you, uh, as far
Are
as
there more
tariffs,
sanctions they could levy?
maybe, but the
Like,
I mean, if I'm Putin, I'm sitting there going, "Oh no, sanctions! Oh no,
ooh, yeah,
what am I going to do?" Right? I
yeah,
mean, before the war, Russia was exporting like $30 billion worth of goods to the United States. That's not a whole lot, actually, right? Considering what major exporting powers actually send here, right? Now it's down to like 5 billion. It just and so Putin's like, oh, what are you going to do? Knock me down to four?
yeah.
I mean, and so when he says things like this, it doesn't seem to occur to him how weak that sounds. Like he's making some major threat, and that is scary, actually, right?
Right.
Where he seems to actually believe that he's got some leverage here when he really doesn't. Meanwhile, Putin and Xi Jinping had a hour plus long video conference call this week in which they reaffirmed their endless partnership and vowed to actually deepen it going forward. None
All
of
weather
them,
friendship.
that's right. Neither of those men were talking to Donald Trump in the first week of his presidency. They were talking to each other.
Right.
And I mean, I'm sorry, that does not make Trump look strong. He is, all right, he's the president of the United States. It's the most powerful political office. But these two guys seem to go out of their way to give him the finger. And I think that's part of why Trump really seemed annoyed about this, right? Is that he's not at that table. Now, he will be eventually. He's going to meet with each one of these guys at some point, right? I don't want to make too big a deal out of this. But, well, uh, things, he's at the height of his power right now. And uh, if he can't get something done pretty soon on the international stage, it'll be more difficult for him to do that. But we'll see how this plays out. For example, during next week's episode, hopefully by then they will have announced what tariffs are going to be in place, right? Because there's supposedly some tariffs going to be instituted on February 1st, which is a week from tomorrow. That is a Saturday. But hopefully on Friday, they will have at least announced what those tariffs are going to be and against whom. So perhaps we'll be able to talk about that next week. Also next week, the newly confirmed Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, is going to be traveling through parts of Latin America, including, by the way, Panama. Now, that's not the only place he's going, but I should note also that all the countries he's going to be visiting, none of them are in South America. They're all inside of what I identified last week as the northwestern quadrant of the globe. And I was just sort of speculating last week about that. Now I'm actually beginning to think that that's the direction of Trump's foreign policy, is just to consolidate and expand United States influence in our
On
own
our
region.
on
Yeah,
our
and
street
leave
corner.
yes, and leave all the rest alone. And that's why he wants to make this deal in Ukraine, actually, right? It's just like, look, just get this. I don't want to have to deal with this anymore, right? Again, I could be wrong about that, but I think there's a lot of evidence to support this thesis. That's all. And so there's the tariffs, there's Rubio in Latin America, and of course, John, most exciting of all is that next week there will be a meeting of the Federal Open Market Committee. And, that's obviously the most exciting thing we ever talk about here on Working for Crusoe. And so, but this will be the first Fed meeting of the year and of the new administration. And we'll see what this means for interest rate policy going forward, which, by the way, could have a more consequential impact on the American economy than anything Trump does. And so much as I like to sort of have my little fun about talking about monetary policy, it's actually really important economically for this country.
President Trump also did say to reporters during a briefing in the Oval Office that he actually knows more about interest rates than the Fed.
That's right. And in fact,
he'll have an opinion about it.
In his address to Davos yesterday, he said that he would demand lower interest rates, right? To which every central banker in the world was like, yeah, tough. We don't work for you. And so we'll have to, but again, we'll have occasion to talk about interest rates many times, including next week. And so we'll see how that all works out.
Can't wait. That'll do it for us on this Friday. He's Sam. I'm John. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, everybody.